Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a conflict of wild extremes that birthed modern American military tactics and literally transformed a scrappy republic into a global superpower. We're talking about the Mexican-American War. Now, this is a period of history that completely reshaped the North American map, but the way it was actually fought, the ground-level tactics, and the massive personalities involved is often totally overlooked. So picture this. From a 300-pound general to a wooden leg left stuck in the mud, this history is absolutely wild and incredibly consequential. We're going to look at how a severely outnumbered force used unprecedented battlefield innovations to defeat massive armies. And spoiler alert, the young men who fought side by side in this conflict, they'd soon go on to shape an even darker chapter of American history.
Section 1. The Disputed Borderlines Spark.
Okay, so President James K. Polk had one primary mission: expand America all the way to the Pacific. But the geographic dispute with Mexico was super complicated. Texas and the United States claimed their border was the Rio Grande. Mexico, however, claimed the border was the Nueces River, which is a good 150 miles to the north. So what does Polk do? He orders General Zachary Taylor to march his army right into the middle of that 150-mile disputed gray zone. It was basically the 1846 version of flexing on someone's driveway to start a fight. And well, the fight definitely happened. Mexican cavalry ambushed an American patrol in what became known as the Thornton Affair, giving Polk exactly the justification he needed to declare war. Section 2. Taylor's Brutal Tactical Innovations. Right out of the gate, General Zachary Taylor is in serious trouble. He finds himself facing a Mexican army of 3,700 troops with only 2,300 men of his own. To survive, Taylor unleashed a massive innovation: flying artillery. Now, instead of static, heavy cannons, these were super light, highly mobile cannons hitched up to fast carriages. They could gallop across a battlefield, blast an enemy formation to pieces, and just vanish before the enemy could even react to their position. When the Mexican cavalry charged at Palo Alto, these lightning-fast cannons completely devastated them. Using this exact tactical innovation, Taylor destroyed two Mexican armies in just 11 days. But, open field tactics kind of fall apart when you hit a fortress city. And that's exactly what Taylor found at Monterrey. We're talking 7,000 defenders, thick stone walls, and deadly sharpshooters perched on literally every single rooftop. When the Americans tried traditional charges down those narrow streets, it was an absolute slaughter. They were just getting obliterated from above. So they had to adapt. And this is where the Texas Rangers stepped in, teaching the Army a brilliant, brutal urban warfare tactic called mouse hauling. Instead of running down the fatal funnels of the city streets, they started blasting holes directly through the shared walls of adjoining houses. They literally moved the entire battle out of the streets and straight into the living rooms of Monterrey. The sheer grit of this claustrophobic urban combat is just staggering to think about. Step 1. Stay out of the deadly streets. Step 2. Blast a hole right through the interior wall. Step 3. Pour into the next building, clear it, and repeat. The Americans tunneled through the entire city house by house like this. It was exhausting, terrifying work, but it was incredibly effective, forcing the Mexican general to surrender the city after 3 brutal days. Section 3. A Tale of Two Generals. General Zachary Taylor had just won this massive victory at Monterrey, but he let the Mexican army walk away with their weapons during an armistice. President Polk was absolutely furious. More importantly, Polk was fiercely jealous of Taylor's rising political popularity. So he makes a dramatic shift. He strips the gritty, informal, beloved 61-year-old Taylor of almost all his experienced troops and hands the main war effort to General Winfield Scott. And these two guys could not be more different. Scott was a 6'5", 300-pound, towering, pompous perfectionist. Now, despite losing his best forces, Taylor is suddenly confronted by the Mexican leader, Santa Anna, who had marched 15,000 men across the desert to crush Taylor's remaining 4,600 green volunteers at Buena Vista. Santa Anna demands an immediate surrender. Taylor's legendary response? "Tell him to go to hell right away, sir." Taylor held his ground, and when his line almost broke, he ordered his artillery captain to double-shot the guns. Against all odds, Taylor miraculously survived the massive assault. Section 4. Scott's March to Victory. Meanwhile, General Winfield Scott had a terrifying, completely unprecedented plan. He was going to invade Mexico's Gulf Coast and march 200 miles straight inland through the mountains to capture the capital, Mexico City. No American general had ever attempted anything remotely like it. He kicked things off by putting 12,000 troops ashore in a single afternoon just south of Veracruz. It was the largest amphibious landing in American history up to that point. And the most astonishing part of the whole shebang? He executed this massive logistical nightmare without losing a single man in the landing. Scott's march inland relied heavily on some seriously brilliant scouting. At a mountain pass called Cerro Gordo, Santa Anna was confident his flank was perfectly protected by impassable terrain. But a young captain named Robert E. Lee crept so close to the enemy, he actually had to hide under a log for hours. Lee found a hidden path through that supposedly impassable terrain. The Americans flanked the position, and Santa Anna's army collapsed so fast that he literally left his wooden leg behind in the mud. No way, right? Getting to the capital was a grueling sequence of sieges and assaults. First, you've got a 20-day bombardment to take the coastal city of Veracruz. Then, deep inland at Churubusco, it's 4 hours of intensely personal, brutal hand-to-hand combat in a convent against the San Patricios. These were mostly Irish Catholic immigrants who had actually defected from the U.S. Army to fight for Mexico. Finally, you have a massive 14-hour artillery barrage pounding the ancient stone walls of Chapultepec Castle, the absolute last fortress guarding Mexico City. During that final infantry assault on Chapultepec, a logistical error delayed the scaling ladders. This left American forces pressed flat against the stone walls under incredibly heavy fire. Picture this astonishing group of young officers pinned on that slope, just waiting to die. Robert E. Lee, Ulysses S. Grant, Thomas Jackson, James Longstreet, George Pickett. It's an entire generation of future military leaders bleeding together on the exact same hillside. Eventually, the ladders did arrive, the walls were breached, and Mexico City fell. Section 5. The heavy price of land. Scott's huge victory ended with him ruling as military governor from the halls of Montezuma. But securing a lasting peace treaty required a defiant diplomat named Nicholas Trist. Trist was actually fired by President Polk for not being aggressive enough. But you know what Trist did? He simply ignored his firing orders. He stayed in Mexico, negotiated the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and secured for the United States an enormous 525,000 square miles of new territory. We're talking modern-day California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of several other states, all for $15 million. That was more than half of Mexico's entire landmass. But let's look at the true cost of this massive expansion, because it was brutal. Out of 13,000 total American deaths, only about 1,700 were actually killed in combat. The vast majority, over 11,000 men, died of disease far from home. It wasn't the bullets that were the deadliest threat. It was the harsh realities of a 19th century military campaign in an unforgiving environment. We'll wrap up this explainer with a pretty haunting realization. Beyond the flying artillery, the claustrophobic mouse hauling, and the brutal sieges, consider those young officers. Lee, Grant, Jackson, Longstreet. They learned these incredibly destructive tactics side by side in Mexico. And just 13 years later, they would take everything they learned here and use it against each other in the American Civil War. It really makes you wonder, did the tactics that built the American map ultimately plant the seeds that almost tore it apart? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.